Have you ever thought of buying a franchise or currently own one or many? If so, this podcast is for you. Welcome to Franchise Euphoria, the podcast created and hosted by franchise attorney Josh Brown for the sole purpose of helping people find success through franchising.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Franchise Euphoria. Today I am thrilled to have Emily Chase Smith on the show. Emily is a financial solutions attorney in California that works almost exclusively with entrepreneurs, and she is an entrepreneur herself. Among other things, Emily will discuss all the things that entrepreneurs hate to discuss, money issues, but are vital to the success of our businesses. Hopefully, my sincere goal is that you will come away from this interview with some good pointers on how to be financially smart and solvent. Hello, Emily, and welcome.
Hi. Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are things on your end?
We're doing well over here.
Well, you and I have known each other for, I don't even know, maybe a year or so now.
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
I think I reached out to you initially because I was sort of searching around online, and I'm like, "Whoa, man! There's another attorney out there who's kind of does stuff online. That's pretty cool."
Yeah, there's not a ton of us in the online space. Yeah.
But so you and I have gotten to know each other, and I'm fascinated by what you do. I think what you do is absolutely vital. But before we dive into all that stuff, I'm just kind of curious if you would talk a little bit about your background, how you became an attorney, how you started working more with entrepreneurs, and just kind of tell your story.
Well, it's a good thing I asked you how long the podcast was before we started recording, because that could be the whole podcast right there, you know.
But you have a fascinating story.
Well, I don't know how fascinating it is. I was an attorney very young. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I graduated from law school very young. I was 21 when I graduated. I'm a firstborn, and I like to advise all firstborns never to say the words law school to your parents because you have sealed your fate. And so I was in and out of law school really quickly, but then proceeded to promptly flunk the bar 2 times. Then I had to go out and become a grown-up. Then I passed the bar in 1997. So it took me a long time to kind of figure out where I wanted to fit into the law. Looking back, that probably the law wasn't a really great fit for me. But, you know, as these things work out, it turns out that, you know, a law degree is very flexible. And so where I've landed now in educating small business owners and entrepreneurs on financial matters, it turns out to be the perfect background for that, because I spent a lot of years as a bankruptcy attorney where I was filing personal bankruptcies for small business owners. So I spent a lot of time inside people's money, inside their businesses and inside their personal money. And so it prepared me perfectly for what I'm doing now.
So how did you graduate law school at 21? I mean, most people are finishing college then.
Yeah, and I advised that, actually. You know, it was one of those things where I had gone to a small school, then I had done an overseas program in Hong Kong. And when I came back, I wasn't really a fit for it was Westmont College in Santa Barbara. I wasn't a really good fit to go back into there. So I was kind of bouncing around. And in California, we have one of the most rigorous bars in the state. But to kind of counterbalance that, we have non-ABA approved schools. That's the American Bar Association. So if you go to a non-ABA approved school, the idea in California is we'll let you get an education. You may or may not pass the bar. You know, the bar is really the standard for whether or not you're going to become an attorney. So it's a lot easier to get into law school in California and a lot harder to actually become an attorney, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah, I know, because, you know, I don't even think I know an attorney in California that passed the bar the first time.
Well, at my time when I was flunking it, JFK Jr. was flunking too. So people were like, oh, you're in good company.
Oh, I have a friend of mine who went to, Michigan undergrad, and then went to Stanford and MIT and all, you know, the Ivy Leagues and everything, and proceeded to flunk the bar the first
Really?
time. Well, part of it is too in California. It's almost, there's so many attorneys are trying to keep, it seems like, people away from it to a certain extent. And I mean, it's really challenging. And it's, I guess for those who don't know, I mean, every state has their own bar, and some states are notoriously harder than others. And California, I think, is one of the hardest, if not the hardest.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And they keep the pass rate. The pass rate is based on percentages, so they never want the pass rate to go much over 50%. So that is just an artificial standard. Period. About half the people who take the bar at any given time are going to flunk it.
See, that's crazy. I mean, I know in Indiana I think it's about a 72% pass rate. And so it's still nerve wracking for sure, but definitely a much higher rate. So tell me about being a bankruptcy attorney, and tell me about dealing with, essentially helping people business owners work through that process. What was that like?
It's interesting. I intentionally, we had lived overseas, and when we moved back in 2009, I thought back through all the areas I had practiced in because we had been overseas for 5 years. And I thought, this is really an opportunity for me to come back to the US and really be very intentional about what I want to do. So I literally sat down and thought through all my former clients, all the firms I had worked for, because at that point I had been an attorney for 10 years. And bankruptcy kept kind of rising to the top because it's an area that you can take people that are really hurting and struggling and you can make it better. And there's a lot of areas in law that's just not the case. You end up kind of just duking it out and everybody's bloody and nobody wins. But in bankruptcy, you can really move the needle for people. You can really be helpful. So I was very intentional about working in that area. And because I'm entrepreneurial, I think that was kind of the clients that I attracted. And then, once you start working with one kind of people group, you end up, with the referrals and all that kind of thing, you end up working a lot with that kind of people group. And they're just my favorite people to work with, entrepreneurs and small business owners, because they move. So as a bankruptcy attorney, you want to kind of get in, dig around, unpack, put together the move forward plan. And then as a bankruptcy attorney, I want to execute it, right? I mean, you could think about it. I'm not trying to force you into anything, but, I don't want to hear from you a year from now and tell me, oh, okay, we think we want to move forward. No, I want to move. So I like clients who want to move too.
So you were doing a lot of restructuring.
I didn't do Chapter 11s where we restructured the business. I was always on the personal side and that's one of the unique things that I think a lot of small business owners don't understand, is you see your business as separate and distinct. And for some purposes it is. For tax purposes it may be, and you may have an entity like an LLC or a corporation. But if you have personally guaranteed some things to do with your business, if you are using your personal credit to support the business, if you are funding the business, let's say through a second on your house or your retirement, for all intent and purposes, financially, you and your business are one. And so what I had was a lot of small business owners that were just kind of, I call it spaghetti. They and their business were so intimately intertwined that when something happened to their business, it took them down personally. And that's why they were coming to see me.
And so how long was it before you were, sort of not, I don't want to say transitioning because you're still practicing, but sort of moving or maneuvering from being just doing the legal type work, and then moving into really more of the counseling and the proactive, preventative maintenance, I guess is what I would call it, to kind of help people so they don't find themselves in that situation?
Well, I started feeling like, and of course I live in California on the coast here, so my analogies are always having to do with water. But I felt like the Coast Guard, like I was continually pulling people out of the water, right? They were running their boat up on the rocks and I was pulling them out. And that was my job, was to pull people out of the water. But after you do that for so long, you kind of want to be the lighthouse, because you start to see all these patterns emerge and you think, doggone it, if we had talked a year or two earlier, you wouldn't even be in my office. You wouldn't even need a bankruptcy attorney. So you start to see the same patterns happening over and over. And there was always an online component to my business, even as a bankruptcy attorney. I had a podcast that was called Big Dumb Stupid Debt, and I blogged and I did a lot of speaking locally. So I always had kind of that element to it. And then as I moved more into, like you say, the preventative medicine, it just was more and more attractive and more energizing. And now I'm kind of wrapping up the legal side of my practice and really focusing on the education.
Really? Are you going to maintain an active status with the bar?
I'm trying to decide. They send you bills every year, which aren't fun to pay, and you have to pay your E&O insurance.
You want my 2 cents?
I'll listen to it. Yeah, absolutely.
No, we'll kind of stray a little bit. Oh, you should definitely keep it.
I work too darn hard to let it go easily. If I let it go, it won't be anytime soon. I can tell you that, because it's just, yeah, you don't let stuff like that go without being very, very sure.
Yeah, because then it's such a pain to get back. I know attorneys who have let it go and for whatever reason, 10, 20 years down the road, they just get an itch to get back into it. And it's such a pain in the neck to get back into once you let that go. But I mean, that's a little sidebar there, but I mean, I think it's fantastic what you're doing because, it's one of the things that I'm trying to do with my practice too, working with entrepreneurs and working with people who are buying franchises and small business owners that want to expand through the franchise model. I mean, one of the things that I'm really trying to figure out how to do better is get these entrepreneurs and individuals to be proactive. I think it's a real challenge to get people who have just started a business or who are following their dreams and they're kind of doing to really take a step and go, look, I've got to fill all these pieces or potentially I'm going to crash. And those are the people I love working with, the people who you can sit there and you can take an entire look at their business and you can proactively protect them to help them avoid some of the issues that others have. But how do you get people to take those proactive steps?
It's interesting in business, you're always trying to tap into a pain point, right? You're trying to meet people where they are. And if there's no issue for them, then there's really nothing that they're seeking out. But for a lot of my entrepreneurs that I coach one-on-one and people who, go through my course or read my stuff, what they're doing is something I've called fingers crossed living, which is they're just hoping this crap works out. And so that's kind of the place where I want to meet my entrepreneurs is, not down the road where they're needing a bankruptcy attorney, but there is something going on for them that they feel uneasy about their business. And they feel like, I don't know if my business is going to be around in 3 or 6 months because I have no idea what's going on with it financially. I know for today I'm okay, but tomorrow, I might go to the grocery store and not be able to use my debit card because there's just no more money in my business to fund my lifestyle. And so that's sort of where I try to reach people when they're starting to feel that uneasiness. They've got enough going on in their business and it's important enough to them, but they feel on very shaky ground.
So you're looking to work with somebody who's somewhat beyond the startup phase. Is that fair?
I do a lot of advising because of the position I have in the marketplace, I do talk to people who are just starting. And that's kind of fun too, because, you can just kind of speak into them. These are the things you need to do. And then they set the foundation and then they go run. Right. But really, most of the people I work with have got something going on.
Yeah, because it's really what I found too is it's just really hard with somebody who's just starting. First of all, a lot of times they don't have the extra capital or they don't want to spend the extra money on that end. But a lot of times you just kind of have to go through it for a certain period of time until you realize, wow, I need some help.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you start working through. So, all right, let's break this down a little bit. Let's turn into the money issues because this is so important. It's one of those issues that every single business owner, every single entrepreneur faces. We run businesses to ultimately make money, and obviously we want to do other things and we want to follow our passions, but you have to keep a business afloat, and the best businesses are run efficiently and profitably. So when you're working with somebody, where do you start typically?
At first, like I'm presuming when you say working with somebody, like a one-on-one situation.
Yes.
Yeah. First, I always start to flesh out what is the long-term goal, because until we know where we're trying to reach, we don't really know what the path is. And I don't want to presume to know what my client's goal is because I'm a big thinker. But for some people, that's not really their goal. Their goal is I want a business that grows to a certain point because I'm looking for more personal freedom. So maybe I don't want to sit at the helm of something giant. Whereas other clients are like, I want it all and I want it yesterday. They've got huge, big dreams, and I'm sure you see the same thing. Some people want to own 1 or 2 franchises and some people want to own 100,
Exactly.
So we always start there. Where are you coming from? What's important to you? And where do you want to see this business going? Because if we don't start there, we're just kind of spitballing.
And then, so once you have an idea of sort of where they want to go. I mean, do you do sort of like an assessment or an audit of their financials? Not really a technical audit, but just looking through to kind of take a look at the profit and loss statements, balance sheets, that kind of stuff? Or where do you go after you've sort of figured out what their goals are?
Yeah, then I need to see what's happening now. And so absolutely, we pour through that stuff together. And I help them understand it and help them understand how the financials in their business can actually guide their substantive business decisions. And that's really exciting for most people. I mean, it feels like numbers like, oh, I have a P&L and I'm just going to, for those of you listening who are uninitiated, a profit and loss. So what's coming in and what's going out. And I'm just going to throw it in a drawer because it's just maybe something I need for tax purposes. But inside that P&L is so much about what's going on in your business. So absolutely, we look at those together. For some of the people I coach, they have had successful years in the past, and maybe they're not as successful now. So sometimes we're delving into history and kind of trying to say, okay, so let's take this back 8 or 9 years when you were really rocking it. What did it look like then? And then we're trying to patch some of that forward because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. If at one point we had something really successful going on, let's see what we can continue forward from that. And some people are at the point where they're growing and they're just looking for how do we get to the next step. So a lot of times it's really kind of like a puzzle for me. And I was talking to a friend, I can't remember who told me this. I think it was Chuck Bowen. And he was telling me a lot of business financials are like those puzzles that have those little plastic squares and they're kind of contained in a frame. And one of the squares is missing. That you can move all those pieces, but sometimes you can only move one at a time. And so a lot of times it's about how are we going to take steps forward that are going to make the puzzle come together. But sometimes we can only take one at a time and we need to be real strategic about which ones we take.
Well, and I love what you do in that process because you can essentially, the numbers don't lie, right? I mean, there's a lot of psychology that goes into entrepreneurship. There's a lot of psychology, I think, that goes into why people are scared of the money issues or why people don't pay attention to certain things and operate on, like you said, cross my fingers and hope kind of scenario. But at the end of the day, that's sort of the exciting, but also the scary thing is that the money, that the numbers don't lie. And I'm curious, do you find a lot of bottlenecks in the same areas with a lot of small businesses? I mean, do you find that there's, and I know it's kind of a generalized statement, but it would seem that there's maybe certain things where it keeps taking you back. Okay, this is a consistent problem that these type of entrepreneurs have. I mean, are there those kind of issues that consistently you see over and over again?
That is such a good question because one of the things that I talk to clients about when I speak, if I have enough time to go into this, I will. We all have a money personality. And we kind of think of our businesses again as very separate from us, but we are at the helm of our business. So whatever crazy we have going on in our lives or with money or whatever, we patch that right over into our business. And so I call myself an entitled cheapskate just because of my background. I came from a divorced family where one side of the family had a ton of money and was super big spenders, and the other side of the family were very thrifty. And so I'm entitled because I feel like I should have everything, but at the same time, I'm a cheapskate. So when I know that about myself, I know that I bring that into my business. And when I look at some of the things I do in my business, like sometimes I'll find myself spending an hour to try to figure something out to avoid spending $20. Like that objectively is ridiculous. But I see that in my money personality. My money personality, we went to Paris and I took a suitcase full of food because I'll go to Paris, but I'm too darn cheap to pay for dinner. So once you know those things about yourself, you start to see them in your business. When you see them in your business, and it's helpful when somebody from the outside can say, hey, that's a little weird, then you can kind of handle and manage around them. So a lot of times I'll start with that money personality. So like I work with a lot of mental health professionals. It's just a space that I happen to be in. And a lot of them have like an avoidant issue around money. Money feels dirty to them or wrong because they're helping people. They're people who like to help. So sometimes that's something we have to tackle. Or, maybe they have that miserly element like I do. Or maybe they're very chaotic in the management. It's just something they can't kind of figure out how to manage their money because maybe some money personality or some money history happened to them. I had a client who grew up in a refugee camp, and that drastically affected how she viewed money. Money was always in very short supply. Food was in very short supply. And even though she was doing really well now, it was very difficult for her to even look at the numbers because they were just scary. Because as a kid, that was just bad news. That was something to be feared all the time. And so I think when you ask me if there's something I see repeatedly, it's that we bring who we are into our business and we need to manage around that.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to, dive in even a little bit deeper into that. I mean, I've never heard the phrase money personality, but I love that. I think it's so true. And we all do that. So, I mean, is there an assessment that you do? Is there, where you then identify somebody, okay, this is your personality. Here's some of the triggers. Here's some of the things that you probably are scared of. Here's some of the things that you probably have a tendency to do. And here's some ways that we can work around those.
Well, I've created your voice. I don't know if you did this, but when we're young girls, we read like 16 magazine and stuff, and there's always quizzes in there, but they're very short, and there's like 5 or 6 questions or whatever. I created one of those. It's just 3 questions to kind of give you a taste of your money personality. It is on my calendar. I'd really like to create a whole like money personality in-depth quiz, almost like a disc profile thing, but for money.
Oh, you need to do that.
It's on the calendar because it'd be so cool.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of like, I mean, it's completely different, but I thought of the Fascinate challenge, or Sally Hogshead has that Fascinate, how other people view you. And for whatever reason, when you said money personality thing, I was thinking of sort of the disc profiles like she does and like other people do, or like strength finders or those kinds of things. That would be a phenomenal thing to create, because you can't change the behavior if you can't identify what the cause is.
Yeah. And I think people think that somehow that's not in their business. Sometimes when I present that idea to people, they're like, oh, no, but when I'm running my business, I'm perfectly sane and rational, and I don't have any money personality at all. You're like, you do, and so that's why I always share, here's my weirdness around money. Because if I can share my weirdness around money, maybe that'll make you feel more comfortable to say, okay, so we all have that. We all approach money in a certain way. And it might be the way we're raised. It might be some experiences we had since then as young adults, but we definitely bring that to the table in our business.
So do you think it's possible, once you've identified your money personality or whoever you're working with, is it a situation where then you try to, can you change that, or are you just trying to work within the confines of who somebody is? Because, at the end of the day, most people are who they are, right?
Yeah, I don't presume to be able to change anybody's money personality. I think that's, I'm just not good enough for that. It's kind of my thought. Like, that's a big challenge. But what I say is manage around it. So actually the other day I'm relaunching my podcast, and I want to, do some different things with it. And so I wanted some different music. And so I was looking through music, and I found some music I really liked, and it was $80. And so I thought, oh, $80. God, that's kind of a lot for podcast music. So I find myself, playing around on the internet some more. And then I realized, this is your money personality. Like, so you're going to spend the next hour or 2 and find music that costs $40. Was that a good plan, Emily? No, that's not a good plan. So I bought the $80 bumper music for my podcast. So once you know it, I'm not sure we can change it, but if we can get ourselves to kind of ping and say, oh, I'm doing that thing, then we can work around it.
That's so great. Yeah. I mean, once you know what your tendencies are, then you can know what the triggers are. Mm-hmm. And then you can identify that. I really, really like that. So after we've got the long-term goal planning. We've got sort of what's happening now, your money personality, how diving into the details. And then is there another step in the process?
Then we have to unpack really the details of what's going on in the business. And that's where, we get out the P&Ls, and we look at historically, and we look at what's going on today. We do a lot of cash flow projecting into the future, because most small business owners don't have that. That's part of that fingers crossed living, where they're just kind of hoping they'll make it through tomorrow. But if we can cash flow project for the next 12 months, we can get a lot of certainty in there. And we can say, oh, look, it looks like June is going to be a low month. Now it's March. Let's not wait till June to find out it's a low month and a scary month. Let's find out in March so we know what we're going to do. So that brings a lot of certainty. And when you can bring certainty and you know you're okay for the next 12 months, that frees up your creativity in business. That just makes your business a lot more fun, and it makes you much more able to bring your best self when you're not kind of waking up in the middle of the night worried about, am I going to be able to make payroll?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do you find that it's different working with, true entrepreneurs versus, maybe working with people who are looking to get into franchise, who are looking to buy another system? I mean, are you going through the same kind of financial analysis?
It is, although, a lot of true entrepreneurs, and, I'm not sure that I would say like there's true entrepreneurs and, fake entrepreneurs, but a lot of true entrepreneurs are bootstrappers, where a lot of people who are doing a franchise are needing a big upfront, chunk of money. So that's a little bit of a different analysis. If you're going to be able to just bootstrap your way through it and kind of muscle through it, as opposed to we need to make some really smart decisions around money at the beginning. Because, again, from my bankruptcy background, it's a lot of times the guys that went out and borrowed a lot of big money at the beginning and their business just couldn't sustain that debt load. And so, kind of the house of cards comes crashing down. So I love to work with franchise, purchasers before they actually have, written the check, to make sure that we're structuring that in a way that is sustainable.
Yeah, I was just going to get to that. You segued perfectly into it. I was going to ask, it's challenging, I think, for a lot of franchise buyers. I mean, unless you are in the position where you already have all of the capital, maybe you've saved for a number of years and you're able to pull the money out in a smart way, or maybe you have capital from other means. A lot of times, you're right. I mean, franchise buyers it's an incredible amount of money up front that they're spending. And what I find is a big mistake that they make is they're undercapitalized. They're not factoring in the ramp up period when you get into franchising. And, I tell people they should have either the capital or the ability to get capital for a period of 6 to 9 months outside of their comfort zone. And I'm curious if you work with people on those issues, on that kind of analysis ahead of time.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've heard that old adage about travel: take half as many clothes and twice as much money.
Yes.
So I say for business, it's twice as much time and twice as much money as you think it's going to be. So make your projections and double it, because, we're optimists. We wouldn't be business owners if we weren't optimists. You have to be a little crazy to think this is a good idea, right? And so we tend to think our idea is so fantastic and groundbreaking that it's just going to ramp up real fast and people are going to see what we offer to the world and we're going to be off and running. And if that happens, that is awesome. But you can't put yourself in the position that if that doesn't happen, you're dead in the water and everything you've invested up until that point is gone. So that is a big consideration, is you have to be sure you have enough, I call it runway. You have enough runway to get your plane off the ground before you, run out and end up in the ocean.
Yeah. And even, there's hiccups along the way. Or I interviewed a guy yesterday who owns several burger joints here in Indiana, and it's been on Man versus Food with Adam Richman. And it's a great business and brand. And we were talking, and he said, yeah, when I first launched my first restaurant, man, we started off like gangbusters. I mean, right out of the gate, it was like, holy cow, we're doing incredibly well. Well, it was the summertime. They have great location outside. They're right by this little, it's called a Monon Trail walking area, and a great location. Well, then wintertime comes, and for whatever reason, people thought that they were closed during the winter.
Yikes. That's a nightmare.
That's a nightmare. So all of a sudden they go from just having this tremendous period of growth and sustained revenues to just a complete drop off. And they were in a position to be able to deal with it, and they made it through just fine. But a lot of people would have really faltered.
And that's why the 12-month cash projection is so important. You have to have 12 months of knowing what's going on in the next 12 months, because that seasonality affects almost every business. Back when my core business was as a bankruptcy attorney, it even affected me. Nobody likes to go bankrupt during the summer or Christmas. period. They don't.
Yeah, no,
They want to
exactly.
be at the beach or spending time with their family. Yeah. So you have to plan for those seasonal things. Yeah. And if he didn't, that could have been a game ender for him. Absolutely.
Oh, and I think it's a game ender for a lot of businesses. I mean, I think, especially when you're dealing with restaurants, and you're dealing with the cash flow that runs through there on a daily, weekly basis, and then for that to completely fall off, I mean, that's that's a big deal. I'm wondering what you would, for people out there or businesses out there that are sustained, that they've been around for a while, and now they're thinking about growing. Whether they're thinking about expanding through the franchise model or just adding another location. I'm wondering what kind of tips or pointers you could give from a financial perspective on, how should they know if they're in a good position to do that?
That's a great question because it's almost like a relaunch of your business. It doesn't feel that way because you have the successful business under your belt, but just like a relaunch, if you overextend yourself, again, it can be a game ender. And so that's the financial piece is so important because you have a lot to protect at that point. You have an existing business and you have your personal finances that are at stake if you don't do it properly. One of the big things that I like to talk to entrepreneurs about is an exit plan. And it sounds a little depressing, like, and I don't mean exit plan like somebody writes you a giant check and you ride off into the sunset. I mean an exit plan like, how far are you going to go with this business before you pull the plug? Because as a bankruptcy attorney, people would walk into my office and they would say, look, my business is for all intent and purposes dead. Like, let's say they didn't have enough cash to make it through when everybody thought they were closed in the wintertime. And then they would go on to tell me, and I personally guaranteed the lease for the space or for several spaces. And so I've got a landlord that's suing me. Oh, and by the way, I used up all my savings and I put a second on my house and I cleaned out my retirement. So I would have somebody sitting in front of me who was basically destitute because they had taken everything they had and thrown it at the business. So one of the pieces that we work on in one-to-one coaching and stuff that I always try to include, I mean, I do it in all my trainings and stuff, and even when I'm speaking, I like to mention it, is what are you going to keep for yourself? Because when you go visit a bankruptcy attorney, the first thing they're going to tell you is, I can deal with your debt, but I cannot create income for you. So if your business is defunct, you need something to eat as you're either going to move into a new business or you're going to move into employment or something. And I would have people in my office that really didn't know where their next meal was coming from because they took everything they had and threw it at their business. So you need to have an exit plan. An exit plan means what is going to be left in the hopper for me if this thing goes down.
No, that's great. I mean, and also even, the exit plan could be that you're trying to build something to ultimately sell it, right? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. That's the more rosy version of an exit plan. That's the non-bankruptcy attorney vision of an exit plan.
That's what you're hoping people are going to do.
Exactly. But, if that doesn't happen, just in case.
Well, no, well, it's been so great talking to you. We've been talking for about 33 minutes now. It's just flown by. And you have so much going on in terms of, you've got your own podcast, you've got a book, you've got a number of different things. I'd love for you to take a few minutes and just tell us about what you have going on right now, what you're excited about.
Sure. Well, my book is coming out in late May. It's called The Financially Savvy Entrepreneur, Navigating the Money Maze of Running a Business. So it's kind of a lot of what we've talked about, just put together in kind of a step-by-step form. And my goal with the book was not to make it dry. That's kind of what I try to bring to all of this is there's a lot of financial information out there, but you can't get through it because it's so terrible. So the goal was, let's pepper it with stories, let's pepper it with examples, and let's make it usable for somebody whose core business isn't bookkeeping or accounting or reviewing of financials. Your core business is something else. So that's exciting for me. I have a course out. It's called Untangling Your Money Spaghetti. It's a 4-week course. And I'm speaking at Podcast Movement and doing a lot of speaking actually at some other events. And it's an exciting time for me. I feel like my message is getting out there. And I love to see when entrepreneurs are really proactive in that, where they feel like, okay, I do feel like I'm a little bit on shaky ground and my fingers are crossed and I'm just hoping to make it. Let's remove that because it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, and what you're providing is so valuable. I mean, it's a classic example. You're taking your skills, as an attorney, as a bankruptcy attorney, and applying it to scenarios where, you can proactively help people. And I love that. And I love that you're utilizing it in that way. And it sounds like you've got all sorts of exciting things going on. How can somebody get a hold of you if they were interested in either talking to you or considering your services?
Sure. My website is emilychasesmith.com, and that's kind of, the central hub, and you can find anything you want there. I blog a lot. Like you mentioned, I podcast. There's a ton of free stuff on there. And then there's information about coaching. There's information about the course, the book, whatever you're interested in, it will be there. But there's also just a ton of free stuff too. I mean, it really is my heart to educate people.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think you have definitely educated people today. I mean, it's, the thing that I always try to reiterate is, it's impossible to get everything in a 30-minute podcast. But I think what you've done is sort of highlighted a process that you go through and highlighted scenarios where, these are tough situations. These are things that people face every single day. They're challenging. They're tough. It's tough to look sort of your business in the eye and see where it's at financially. But if you don't do that, it's just an absolute recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. Actually, I wrote an article. Do you know Tom? It's Morkes, and he does the Insurgent Journal. Are you familiar with him?
No, I've never heard of him.
Yeah. He does this cool thing, and his first issue was all about courage. So he asked me to write an article, and I wrote it on exactly what you just said. How much courage it takes to look and see exactly what the truth is that's going on in your business. I think it takes a lot of courage, but it pays off, just like courage always does.
And it's freeing too. I mean, that's the other thing that somebody should get out of this, is that if you're listening and you're in that situation where you sort of feel the weight on your shoulders, it's a very freeing thing to just let that go, to talk to somebody about that, right?
Exactly. And to feel like, it's almost like when you get your car washed, you feel like, why didn't I do this last week? Like, I've been driving around this crappy car, I get in a dirty car, whatever. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, it's kind of a game changer. It's a mind shifter. And this is just that on steroids.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Emily. I definitely look forward to staying in touch and reading your book when it comes out. It sounds fantastic. And maybe even after the launch, I'd love to have you back on and we can talk specifically about that.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.